Hello, and I really hope you like my Maxine cosplay. I know that nobody knows what this makeup is for, but I feel that when this movie comes out, it will be like a thing, just because it's such an iconic scene that it's a part of. Anyway, I'm just gonna get right into my review and my analysis, but before I do that, I want to tell you this is a fully spoiler review. I'm gonna talk about the entire plot, I'm gonna talk about an analysis of the movie, and what I think, and then I'm going to respond to some of the critiques of it, because I really didn't think that I would get this out as early as I am, because I did see it, I don't know, one day ago, but the internet is already talking about it and they're saying that it's the worst movie in the trilogy, which I needed to set the record straight a little bit, because it's definitely not, based on my unprofessional opinion, uneducated opinion, never went to film school opinion. I think it's fantastic. And the internet just needs more people's opinions on it. That's one thing that the internet definitely needs. So I'm going to talk about my subjective analysis of Maxine, and I'm just going to start with describing what actually happens in the movie. I'm also going to describe some of the kills, because I think that they are really, really, really interesting. So Maxine is the third installment of the trilogy, which starts with chronologically Pearl, X, and then Maxine, but they released X first, and then Pearl is like the prequel. Pearl is the foil to Maxine. So Pearl is the old woman who's slashing everyone in X, and she's also the main character of Pearl, and you see kind of her psychological breakdown. But they are foils of each other, and I think I'm going to like defend why I think Maxine is so good, but that's one of the reasons why it's so fantastic, is like this lead up has been a total homage to horror in a way that is basically never been done before. So basically the plot is, this is the story of Maxine Minx, played by Mia Goth, obviously, the sole survivor from the first movie, set in 1985, 6 years after the events of X. Maxine has moved to Los Angeles to pursue her dream of becoming a movie star. She's currently an adult film star, which I don't even know if I'm allowed to say that, but I need to, because it's very titular to the story, so whatever. The film basically explores the darker side of Hollywood as Maxine tries to break into mainstream films. She gets a big break when Elizabeth Bender, a renowned filmmaker played by Elizabeth Debicki, I don't know if I'm saying that right either, casts her in a major studio project, which is a faux horror movie called The Puritan 2, and it's set in a world where The Puritan 1 is like a famous slasher horror movie with nuns in it. So Kevin Bacon, the private investigator, is hired to track her down, and her women in her circle and her best friend is unalived along the way while she's figuring out who is doing this to her. So she's basically just getting tormented. And that's kind of the entire 3 movies, is just like Mia Goth being tormented, which is like, shouldn't be as entertaining as it is, but when it's done so well, you know, like that's horror movies. So this movie has a lot of really great actors in it. Lily Collins, Halsey, Moses Sumney, and Michelle Monaghan. So that's kind of just the basis of the plot. So Ty West specifically said that Maxine is a substantially larger production compared to its predecessors, aiming for a big, sprawling Los Angeles ensemble movie that captures the essence of 1980s Hollywood. Do I think that was successful? 100%. Every single shot in this movie is so successful in that mission of it being like a 1980s Hollywood homage to horror piece. It's unlike the other movies because it's a crime thriller mystery. The kill count is lower, but the gore is just totally crazy. So some examples of the gore in this movie is there's lots and lots of shooting. There is a very, very graphic ball stomping scene. There is a hydraulic press car crushing scene. I don't really want to spoil too much about it. That kind of ruins the movie-going experience. If you want to see it in the movie theater, you should be a little bit surprised by some of them, so I'm just going to leave the rest to imagination. I gotta say my favorite character was Moses Sumney's character. This is Maxine's best friend in the movie. He is such a self-insert horror fan. Like, they fall asleep together to a horror movie, and she's really vulnerable with him in a way that we haven't really seen Maxine be vulnerable before. And I think that's a big theme in Maxine, as well as like Mia Goth doesn't have that many lines. It's almost like she's just being re-traumatized over and over again, and it's a very like human, non like heroine reaction to trauma, which is really realistic and makes it a better movie to me, because it wouldn't be realistic for her to be like John Wick and just go and say John Wick on everyone. Like, she is a human being with trauma who has gone through an insanely traumatic event and series of events and continues to be traumatized. A lot of horror movies don't really show respect for like the average horror enjoyer, and they portray them as like just not in the best light. Specifically in American Horror Story, it was like really cringy the way that they portrayed like a horror enjoyer. I think it was Noah Cyrus who was like a horror movie fan who went to the murder house, and she was like taking selfies and being annoying. Whereas like this character, Moses Sumney's character, is so cool, and he's so intelligent, and he's like just like all the horror movie enjoyers that I meet are more like Moses Sumney's character than other horror movie enjoyer tropes I've seen in the past, which I really liked. And it was really self-aware that way. Like, it knows its audience and it knows like what its audience perceives themselves as. So again, it's more of a mystery crime thriller than a horror movie, which I think is why it's not getting the immediate acclaim that I think it deserves, because people are wanting another X and they're wanting another Pearl, but that's not really how Ty West does his movies. And I'm going to talk about why it makes sense that this is not just like X and just like Pearl. There's also a lot of found footage in this movie that's done incredibly well. It's done way better than in I Saw the TV Glow. And I'm not trying to compare, but just like logistically speaking, it's just done better. It's more realistic and it's way spookier. And I just thought it was like really eerie, and the crowd was having a lot of fun at my theater, but during the found footage moments, like everybody was a little bit scared because it was so like serial unaliver, like very creepy. And as for Richard Ramirez being in it, the unaliving that happens is blamed on him, but there are no scenes of him specifically. I think that was the right way to do it, because it would be so extremely disrespectful to have a Richard Ramirez character in this movie. It would, first of all, cheapen it, because you can't do that. Second of all, it would push the line a little bit too much. I think true crime is a thing that people are they're not sensitive enough about, and the perfect amount of Richard Ramirez was in this movie. There was like some pictures of his sketch, which is like the most horrifying thing in the entire world. I literally hate that picture. I'm gonna put it up because I need you to experience why it's so fucking scary. But I'm just really glad they didn't make it a Richard Ramirez movie. I was really worried about that, and I was also worried when I saw Sam Levinson in the credits scene, but not to worry. Not to worry, it's no idol. It's very, very good. So again, this maxxxine is an ode to 80s, 90s Hollywood and 80s, 90s horror, which I think arguably 80s horror added this campiness to horror that it never really had before. And a lot of 80s horror movies we have to pay respects to, because horror would not even be half of as good or as developed or as like nuanced as it is now if it weren't for the horror of the 80s. And if you're a horror fan, you need to like watch some of those movies just to understand their real impact. And I think Ty West has been making movies for a really long time. Obviously he knows that, but I just don't think that he misses the mark. And I think it's just like a feat what he did with this homage to 80s horror. The world building in maxxxine is incredible. I specifically remember there's a scene where she's grabbing a gun out of her closet, at the top of her closet, and she's pawing around at like all of her knickknacks and items on top of her closet, and even the box that the gun is in, it's like an old shoebox or something. It's full 80s immersion down to the box, down to the marker that they used to write on the VHS tapes. It's like every little thing is so thought out and so detailed. I was really worried that it would be rushed, because I felt like the marketing was a little bit rushed, and I work in marketing, and I just felt like it was a little bit rushed and they wanted to get it out during the summer because that's when horror movies kind of do the best. But none of the actual film felt rushed. It felt so thoughtful and so respectful to the audience. I just don't like it when movies make it so a rewatch is borderline impossible because there are so many details missing. I feel like I could watch this movie 5 times and not catch all the little details, and that's my favorite part of rewatching a movie. So I loved it. I loved that part specifically. The world building, I have to reiterate, was so amazing. And again, Maxine doesn't have a lot of dialogue in this movie. She is traumatized and she's getting re-traumatized, and she literally was the sole survivor of a huge slasher event. That's like, obviously it's a slasher movie, what X's, but I feel like people are expecting her to not be traumatized when she completely is. There was a review I found on IMDb that I thought was so perfect and like really summed up a lot of my thoughts about the movie. A heroine who is likable despite having her own moral flaws. Like Hollywood itself, Maxine is really a cipher for the spirit of the town and the industry. She's all about ambition and all about surfaces. Her rocky past be damned. And this is by Drowned Soda 90 on IMDb. And I just specifically want to talk about this review because it's the same thoughts that I had the moment I finished it, was that the movie is so much an example of Hollywood itself. Almost like people in Hollywood, in this industry, are completely trying to be something that they might not be at their core, but they want to be. And that's kind of the magic of Hollywood, is like you are allowed to be someone that you're not. And that's kind of like Maxine's escape from all this trauma and stuff that she's gone through, which not only is the slasher trauma, but also the religious trauma, which is arguably the meat of this review and why I wanted to make this video in the first place. Another thing about Maxine was it really reiterated how SW isn't her final destination. It's not what she wants to do forever, and it's causing her a lot of trauma as well. There are multiple points in the movie where there are men saying things to her that are really degrading, and like because of the videos that she's been in, and it was so fucking annoying. There was a dude in the theater that I was at that was laughing at all of the really satirical jokes that these men were saying to Mia Goth in the movie. Like, he was literally laughing at them, and it's like he was the only one, but they were put in there like to make fun of people like you, because it's really gross when you talk about women like that. Especially like, just because you've seen someone in a movie doesn't mean that you can talk about them like that. It's so totally insane. So again, like there's multiple points where she's just dehumanized for being a SW, and it is her method to be famous, but it's not her final goal. Like, she's visibly frustrated with the constant boundaries being pushed, and there's a scene where it kind of like bubbles up and she goes at someone with a set of keys in her fists and punches the shit out of someone. And it's literally one of my favorite scenes in the entire movie, because it's like there are all these mini climaxes. That's a thing with Ty West's movies, is there's a lot of like mini climax scenes, and that was one of them. Like, all of her rage just bubbling up, and then she's like totally punching shit at this guy, and then drives away in her car because he's following her, and she feels like she's constantly being dehumanized. Maxine's ultimate goal is she's striving for fame that doesn't exploit her, because she's been exploited her entire life, because the movies that she's been in and that SW is the same coin, just the opposite side of the fundamentalist religious group that she was in as a child. That was basically a cult. So on one side of the coin, she is kind of in charge of her destiny, but it comes at the expense of her getting dehumanized. And then on the other side of the coin, she's totally trapped by her family, or specifically her dad, but she is still getting dehumanized in the same way. So Maxine is trying to escape this cycle that she's in of being exploited, whether it's SW or it's being in a super religious culty group where her dad is making her the face of like God in this group, like, and she's trying to escape being on this coin. This is two sides of the same coin. So she decides to use what her dad told her and make it into something completely new. And in Maxine, you learn that her dad told her the like most famous OG quote, like, "I will not accept a life I do not deserve." And that was originally meant for a religious purpose, and then Maxine repurposed it to be something that she used to fuel her journey to escape this objectification that she's getting on both ends of this spectrum. I hope I've laid down a good groundwork of what happened in the movie. It's a crime thriller drama where Maxine has a lot of really iconic moments. She is fully in charge of her destiny, and she grabs every opportunity she can to defend herself and squash what is haunting her and what's attacking her. There are no moments where she shies away from that, and even with the lack of dialogue for Mia Goth, it just seemed like the entire movie was really full of emotion and the acting was just incredible. I also can't really talk about this movie without talking about the other movies, because they work together as a perfect horror trilogy in multiple ways. Above all, they're fantastic movies. Like, they're good horror. They are something that is objectively, you can't really argue with how good it is, especially with all the shitty horror movies that are coming out. These just have like an identity behind them. They have like a purpose, and they just feel really refreshing to watch. The horror of Pearl is psychological horror and character study horror, and the horror of X is a slasher horror, and the horror of Maxine is a crime horror. But it's also a final homage to Hollywood itself and the reason that the first two movies were made in the first place. In the first two movies of the series, X and Pearl, Maxine and Pearl are both striving towards escapism from fundamentalism. And I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this trilogy is about fundamentalism. And what Maxine did was it broke the fourth wall. So if Pearl and X existed in their own universe, Maxine exists in the universe where they remind... My cat is being so fucking annoying, dude. She's hungry and she doesn't get fed for another couple hours. She's like fucking screaming. So if X and Pearl are set in their own respective universes where these two women are trying to escape fundamentalism, Pearl is trying to escape the fundamentalism of her mother telling her her traditional roles, and also her feeling that she needs to be a mother and a wife. And X, Maxine's obviously escaping her like fundamentalist father. If those two are in their own universes, Maxine jumps into our universe and reminds us that fundamentalism is literally everywhere. And I think that's why this movie is so perfect for right now, and it's what we needed to see, it's what we needed to hear. You specifically see Maxine hate the fundamentalist ideas that she's grown up with, because she lashes out at Jenna Ortega's character for feeling like she's being judged, and it's that like different reaction to being in a fundamentalist group that makes Pearl and Maxine have completely different trajectories in life. And that's another thing that I want to talk about a little bit later. And in all of the three movies, the gore and the horror is just perfect, because the audience for these movies is not the audience that would be really too sensitive to understand the criticism on fundamentalism that Ty West is really doing. At least I think he's doing. And I say this because he's done other movies, two movies specifically, that have everything to do with kind of critiquing fundamentalist religion and like basically critiquing super extreme religion. And in all three of these movies, like the same thing that's the same besides Mia Goth's character is the reaction to feeling like you're trapped in a fundamentalist group. So now I want to get into the gender roles fundamentalism of it all and why I think Maxine is the thing that we need to hear as a society right now. And that sounds really stupid that like a horror movie is important for society, but it says something that I haven't really seen said in a movie before in this way, in such a bold, crazy way, is like, you're never going to stop people from doing what they want to do, no matter what you do. And I think that's, for some reason, we're regressing in that way, and we're forcing people to fit into these boxes and to fit into these archetypes that are just not going to work. And no matter how much you try, it's just not going to work. They're either going to Pearl and go completely insane and unalive everybody, or they're going to do the Maxine route, which is like, she's severely traumatized, but she went the complete opposite direction just to escape. And she will never talk to her father again in a lot of different ways, because she does shoot her father in the head, and it's very graphic. And it's like almost like the climax of the movie at the very end. So specifically Maxine, the movie, it tackles this idea of fundamentalism in a really, really literal way. There's this overbearing metaphor of Hollywood sets, because there's like multiple scenes in like an actual Hollywood set, and it is connecting Hollywood with Maxine, her past of religious fundamentalism, and society's reaction to horror movies. The director of Maxine's film that she's in, The Puritan 2, specifically said something really similar to, it's crazy how something can look so real, but it's so fake and hollow. And that is exactly what this movie is doing a metaphor of. Another thing in Maxine is that there are protesters saying that horror movies are like for the devil, and they're saying that there's a sign that literally says the devil stole my daughter, and there's just a huge adverse reaction to this horror movie, The Puritan 2. And the climax of Maxine ends with her father literally just saying this. He's like, you Hollywood people are a bunch of like devil worshipping whatever, I'm gonna expose you, I'm gonna do an exorcism on you, like they took you, they made you into something else. But you see in this movie specifically, the group of Hollywood is not a bunch of devil worshipping pagans, they're just people working. It's literally just people working on a movie set. And weirdly, this is a thing that people think now to this day, that there's some like behind the scenes modus operandi to brainwashing people, and it's like, movie sets are just movie sets. There is no I mean, sometimes there's some kind of propaganda, but like, it's not a huge conspiracy theory. These are just people trying to make a movie. So Maxine really shows you that Maxine herself, the way that she is, and the SW and the having to go through all this crap that makes her basically like psycho, like she is just like a really stark representation of having trauma and having to escape all this trauma by doing stuff for survival. Anyway, Maxine herself is literally a reaction to her fundamentalist upbringing, just like the horror movies like The Puritan 2 in this universe, and even horror movies now, are a reaction to fundamentalism and conservatism. This has always been a thing, and it's a thing in Pearl, it's a thing in the X universe, it's a thing in Maxine's universe, it's a thing now. Fundamentalist people will impose such strict rules on people and strict archetypes that they end up completely disobeying these rules, and then the fundamentalist side literally says, oh, you guys are literally devil worshippers and you're broken, and they're not realizing that it's just a reflection of themselves. But on the fundamentalist side, it will never work because people are never going to be fully good. And you see this specifically in Maxine's father, who's literally unaliving everybody in really gruesome ways and like really intense ways to try and justify the means to the end to capture Maxine and get Maxine back. So it's really cool because the entire movie is like this back and forth between this good and evil, which is Maxine and her father. And you would think on the top of it, like on the surface, that Maxine is the evil one and her father's the good one because he's the fundamentalist religious one and Maxine is the SW. But it's more of a like reaction to what she went through. It's not black and white, and everyone has evil in them, and most people are doing things for survival and in reaction to strict rules. So there's this giant metaphor within this entire movie that the set that Maxine is working on mirrors her relationship with her father. Just like the protesters think that the set is doing devil worship on set, and her father thinks that she's literally possessed. It's like both the movie and Maxine are a reaction to what fundamentalism did. There wouldn't be horror movies in the first place if there weren't some kind of backlash against it, because it's exciting when there's backlash. People love to do things that get backlash. It's like the reason that horror movies even exist is because of fundamentalism itself. So there's so many layers of like one side completely misrepresenting the other, and the other being a total consequence of the other side, if that makes sense. Like, Maxine's father is a hyper murderous psycho, and he genuinely thinks that he is saving Maxine. And it's really, really scary because that's kind of what fundamentalism can do to you. It can warp your brain a lot. So now let's talk about religion and the trilogy and how this idea is manifested in all three movies. There's this current throughout Ty West's movies that is critiquing why people want to do extremist religion, and it's 100% about control. It's not about being virtuous. And Maxine's dad shows this specifically. So I think Maxine and the entire trilogy is super, super self-aware, and it's the commentary that fundamentalism has always been a thing and it has never worked. And I don't think like it's a feminist manifesto by any means, but the way that it specifically affects women is just perfect for these movies because it is stronger on women. Like, the fundamentalist ideas are way stronger on women and minorities. So it's just the perfect storm of like a main character and a heroine and like a kind of an underdog story. But it is about how fundamentalism doesn't work, because it didn't work with Pearl and it didn't work with Maxine, and it just causes destruction around it if you try and force people to do stuff. And it's really cool because these movies reflecting each different genre of horror, kind of like the slasher, the psychological horror, and the crime thriller, and Hollywood itself is like, it's self-aware to the fact that horror movies are a total consequence of not being allowed to make horror movies. Because I don't know if people know, but there was a lot of censorship with horror movies, and there was a time when it was like considered really bad to make horror movies. And that seems crazy now because kind of the world is so, like, a lot of the TV shows and movies we watch are really violent, but it wasn't always like that. And I think we need Maxine so badly right now because the fundamentalist like religion vibe is becoming way, 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 way worse than it has been in the past 5 years. It's like there's this wave of people that think that fundamentalist religion will fix what's going on in society. Like, one off the top of my head example is like that Harrison dude's speech about preaching about fundamental values that happened at like a huge event, and he's like in the, I think it's the NFL. He's a huge public figure, and he's totally just preaching about how we shouldn't have gay people and like that women should be at the home. And it's like, you can say that all you want, but people are not going to listen to you because people don't listen to fundamentalism. It never works. There would not be so many people deconstructing their fundamentalism and so many things happening where people are lashing out against it if it did work. People need to choose for themselves what they want, and you can't really force them either way. And if you do, they're gonna pearl on you, and that's kind of the thing that I get from these movies. But Maxine is an epic movie because it is an example of someone using all of this trauma and all of this like the thing that she had to escape makes her fantastic, and it makes her a star. So Maxine kind of asks the question, if the challenge and the struggle that we're dealt is actually good, just like the movie has said to us multiple times that there is no good and evil, and it's all mixed up. And if that is true, then the bad things that happen to us are actually good because they make us into a fucking movie star. There's like the message multiple times in this movie that if you don't keep your eye on the prize, you'll get spit out and you'll fail. And that's like repeated a few times. And Maxine herself, she breaks the fourth wall, I think, and she says, her advice to young ladies is to just not give up. And I think it's really, really interesting because there's no fucking way that she would be at that spot that she's in at the end of the movie if she had none of this strife and struggle that came before it. And the difference with Pearl is that when she received this struggle and this cage that she was built in, just like Maxine, she did not try again. Like, she tried once to leave, and that was her dancing trope thing. And Pearl haunts Maxine because she knows that if she gives up, she will end up just like Pearl. And it's like really unfortunately true. It's like, if you do give up, you will not make it to the point where you feel like you've escaped this, like, these expectations. It's not even that Maxine doesn't like expectations, she just really likes the expectations to be placed upon her by herself. So she says this to the director, she's like, I will do anything I have to do. And it's like, that's her passion. She feels like she will fully take directions from the director, but taking directions from her father is a completely different thing because she didn't choose that. And it's like, that's kind of the message I'm getting from these movies, is like, you need to let people do what they want to do. And if you make it about trying to force people to do things, it's not going to work. It works on so many levels, with the message of the movies, with like the metaphor it's bringing up, with not only pressure making you into a diamond, as like cliche as that is, but also the love of horror because it represents a subculture that has been defiant since the very beginning, and it's been pushing the limits since the very beginning of its creation. Overall, I think this is a fantastic film, if you couldn't guess already. And I want to go over some of the critiques that I've been hearing on TikTok, to just talk about what I think about the critiques and if I agree, because it's not a perfect movie, but it is, as of today, my top on Letterboxd. So some people are saying it's not sexy enough or violent enough. And what I have to say about that is that X was specifically a commentary on the exploitation of slasher movies, as well as all the other shit. But of course it was really, really sexy because it was about slasher movies, and slasher movies have a lot of that in them. Maxine, if it had a bunch of those scenes in it, it wouldn't really make sense because it's more of a noir crime thriller, and it's a completely different genre than X. So I think people are comparing them way, way, way too much. But what I think is that if Maxine came out by itself, it would be extremely, extremely acclaimed, and I think it's overshadowed by the success and the cult following of X and Pearl in a way that people aren't really appreciating Maxine for how amazing of a movie it is because they had all these expectations. I don't think we can expect a director to like make total magic out of like thin air. I think we're fed way too good with movies, and we expect directors to get better and better and better and better and better, when that's kind of not the point of the trilogy. The point of the trilogy is to tell a story and to make a commentary on something. And the not stylish enough part, I don't even want to like entertain that, because down to Maxine's gun, every single thing about the character is thought out, is glamorous. It's so 80s, and the immersion is just fantastic. So I don't think that that critique is even valid at all. For example, when she's going to basically attack her dad, she wears her little cunty high heel boots. She doesn't put on sneakers. So little things like that, I really think it's stylish, and I think it's just as stylish as the other ones. It's funny because in X, Maxine really wasn't dressing for herself, and people seem to enjoy the costuming of X more than Maxine, where in Maxine had her own apartment, she had a best friend, she had a closet full of clothes, bunch of shoes, like she had a life set up for herself, so she's dressing differently. And people didn't really like that, which is a little bit like, I don't know, like I really like to see how she dressed herself when she was in a more comfortable place and she felt safe. Another critique was that the characters, except for Maxine, weren't really fleshed out a lot. And while I sort of agree, I do think the genre it was trying to emulate, which is like 80s horror and like thriller vibe, there isn't a lot of character development. It's mostly chase, it's mostly style, it's mostly cinematography, and you need to make those decisions for yourself on how deep you want to think about a character. So do I think that all the characters are really, really fleshed out? No, but I think it's pretty much impossible because there's so many different places that the characters are. There's very little time to really talk. So I think it made good use of like putting characters in scenes where you get their personality based on just one scene. Like, Halsey's in like 2 scenes, and I got what her character was like just from her ordering a hot dog and the things that she says to Maxine. But that is a really valid critique. If you want a character study with all the other characters and you want a drama, this is not your movie for sure. This is definitely like an 80s horror movie, which is what it's trying to emulate, and I think it did a pretty good job. People are also saying this is the weakest film of the trilogy. I think that my favorite has to be this one. My second favorite has to be X, my third has to be Pearl. But Pearl is 5-star movies, so it's really, really hard to rank them. But obviously everyone's opinion is subjective. So I think we're just expecting a little bit too much of like human beings in Hollywood to make movies that are continuously better and better and better. Because if you've watched 80s horror, it's fantastic. But is there as much going on as in like this movie, which is just like a random horror movie that emulates the 80s? I don't even know. Like, the cinematography and the immersion and the SFX, it's just gotten better and better and better. So it's like, it's really, really hard to say that. And I often like find when I'm watching movies from the 80s, as much as I enjoy them and how much I appreciate them for what they've done with horror, I will sometimes get the ick from female characters because they are so objectified and they're not really acting like a human being. So I think a lot of fans take that for granted, that they can just watch any movie and feel great about it. Like, I'm sure you've noticed there's like sensitivity issues. Like, even in like a bunch of comedies from the early 2000s, there are like racist jokes and stuff, and you wouldn't, like, a lot of people wouldn't notice them if they weren't in the minority they were making fun of. But when you are, it's like you get kind of icked out by the movie, and as much as you might enjoy it, there are parts of it that you're like, I didn't really want to hear that. So in conclusion, I think that as much as people would like to say this is the worst movie of the trilogy, my personal opinion is that it's the best movie. But also it did a fantastic job at glamorizing the ugly and the beautiful parts of Hollywood in a way that was a beautiful metaphor for fundamentalism, and also how our reactions to fundamentalism can make us better, which is really weird because fundamentalism is pretty much a bad thing. So I really liked the way what it made me think about. Watching it was like the ultimate popcorn movie. It was so entertaining, and the stylization and like the advertisements done of like the Maxxxine Hollywood sign, shit like that, awesome. And I don't think that I've seen a horror trilogy like this ever before, and I'm just so excited to see what Ti West does next. I'm excited to see how horror movies are going to develop from here, because it's going to be really, really, really hard to top the feeling that I feel when I'm watching these movies. It's just like, it's so awesome, and it's like so perfectly gory too, which is something that I can't say for a lot of modern horror movies. I think they don't go all the way. So that's my thoughts. If you couldn't tell, I did grow up in Catholic school. So I have my own ideas about this, and one of my special interests is reading about and watching videos about what is happening in modern day Christian fundamentalism. I think that's really, really interesting. So I know a lot about it, and I might have the wrong opinion, and I'd love to hear what you think about the movie. And it's really easy for us to like just put upon a movie what we want it to be. Anyway, if you watched all the way through, thank you so much for watching my video, and I'm 99% sure my next video will be the psychology iceberg, and if it's not, it will be the Longlegs review, and I'm very, very excited about that. I think as much as X is a fantastic popcorn movie, sorry, Maxxxine is a fantastic popcorn movie, it's not super scary. I think Longlegs will scare me, and I think that this is the first analog horror vibe kind of seen in the theater. So I'm extremely excited, and like, I'm gonna hop skip into that theater. I'm so excited.